Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joinedup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters and key figures from the publishing industry. Plus loads of hints, tips and inspiration for all creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review or just tell a friend. Joined Up Writing. Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 148, which brings us an interview with Emily Houghton talking about her debut novel, or Neville as I called it during our chat, called Before I Saw You, which is a really original take on the traditional rom-com genre. We also talk about just getting on with it, shaking off the self-doubt and getting your work out there. And on that very subject, before we get to the actual interview, a quick catch-up from me. I recently recorded an interview for an upcoming show, and at the end of the chat, off-air if you like, my guests started asking me about my writing and what I was up to, and I began to garble my usual response about needing to get feedback for subbing my crime novel again and all the usual self-deprecating stuff about how I'm not sure if the book is actually any good now, that I've received a few rejections and the varying opinions on what I could look at and the different things I could change. The truth is, as I've mentioned on here many times before, I'm currently just struck by a bit of a crisis of confidence, and I've got to the point where I'm wondering whether my edits that I make now are actually improving the book or just diluting what I originally had. And the person I was speaking to was really supportive. They asked me lots of questions about the story and even threw in some possible suggestions as to things I could consider looking at, particularly around character and theme. And our conversation ended up with them asking me to send them the first 3 chapters for some feedback, which I promised I would do before the end of this week as I'm recording this. So I'm going to have another look over the beginning and may actually revert back to the version I had a couple of edits ago, as I do think I might have lost something with some of the changes that I've made recently. And this isn't the first time I've been offered help or potential feedback, but it's been quite a long time since I've actually felt motivated to properly look at the manuscript, and it's a great chance for me to get back to it. So stay tuned for how that goes, but it does feel good to have a deadline of sorts and another opinion on my work, so I'll let you know how that pans out. But what about you guys? How are your projects progressing? Are you keeping the self-doubt at bay? Maybe you've had some success and you'd like to share that, then please do. Get in touch by tweeting me at JU Podcast, emailing wayne@waynekellywrites.com or dropping me a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. Totally free, and you get a couple of downloadable goodies when you sign up, as well as being the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Right, enough of my prattle. Let's get on to today's interview, a chat with Emily Houghton. So Emily is an ex-digital specialist and now full-time creative writer. Alongside writing, Emily's passionate about mental health and well-being. She's a trained yoga and spin teacher, and she loves nothing more than supporting and motivating others to reach their goals. Her debut novel, Before I Saw You, is out right now everywhere you can find good books. Enjoy the chat, and I'll pop back at the end to wrap things up. Joined Up Writing. Well, thanks for coming on Joined Up Writing, Emily. Really appreciate it. So why don't you just start off by giving us a sense of where you're speaking from and give us a sense of how things are going at the minute.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm speaking to you from a rather grey looking outside my window.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah. So from Dalston in East London.
Yeah.
And how are things going at the moment? Well, yep. So I've got my first book out called Before I Saw You. So it came out on the 4th of February, and in hardback and also ebook. The paperback release is to follow later in the year. And currently in the midst of writing a second book, which has been very interesting during
But it
lockdown.
has. Yeah.
Yes.
How have you been finding that? I mean, a lot of writers have been struggling. You think, well, it's great, we've got loads of time, but that's not really kind of worked out like that.
Yeah, I think it's very different. Even if we weren't in lockdown, I think the setting compared to when I wrote Before I Saw You is so different anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But then adding on not even really having any stimulus or social interaction, which for me is really important, especially writing about people and their lives and relationships. So it's been interesting. Sometimes I think I've nailed it and I found my routine, and then the next day I'll do exactly the same thing and I'll just be sat there with nothing coming through.
It's interesting that you mentioned the thing about, as you say, meeting people and relating to people and having social interactions and things, because I've got a friend that's a stand-up comedian, and obviously of his, that unfortunately that profession for the time being has been, completely decimated, not been able to do any real live gigs or anything. And he was saying the same thing. I mean, he really thrives on being able to go out and chat to people, and even doing gigs, he kind of gets more material from doing gigs because he meets more people and he gets into more situations and things. And he's actually just taken a job working at a supermarket, partly out of necessity, obviously, but also he said that it's helped him start writing again, because he's actually got stuff to write about. He's actually meeting other people and getting into different situations and stuff. So I think that's spot on. That's true. So you've kind of mentioned the book there, Before I Saw You. So why don't you tell us about that? Tell us what the premise is about your debut novel, even. Debut novel, not your debut Neville. I mean, it might be, but is anybody called Neville in it? I don't think so.
Second book. There you go. That's inspiration.
Before I Saw Neville, the sequel.
I mean, I'm going to note it down. You never know when it's. Before I Saw You is about two characters, Alfie and Alice, and very, very different. I would say almost, upon first meeting, almost completely opposite kind of characters. And they actually find themselves in the hospital beds next to each other. So they both undergo some pretty life-changing traumatic accidents, and the story kind of follows their very unlikely friendship over time. Also looks at their journey to self-acceptance and healing, whilst also exploring whether their friendship becomes something a little bit more. And it's really based on that idea of what it means to be seen by someone. So they exist behind the curtains. They never see each other when they first kind of start interacting, and it's just a story of vulnerability, and I guess, can you fall in love with someone without seeing their face? Really is kind of the
central premise of it. Yeah, because as you say, I mean, when you first started talking about that, obviously it's kind of the setup of loads of different romantic comedies and everything else in opposites attract and all that. But obviously this is really an original idea from the point of view, as you say, they're in a situation where they can't actually see each other. And I know there's other, complications and things with it as well. So what was it that kind of sparked the initial idea for you? Do you remember that? Or what was it, something that came out of a personal experience?
No, well, as in I am fortunate enough not to have been in a long-term hospital.
Yeah, sure. But more generally speaking,
actually for me it was really interesting. So the idea itself came to me quite a few years ago. Almost, and when I say it out loud, it always sounds really strange, but it is what it is. Almost as this vision of, I kind of just saw these two people laying in these beds next to each other, separated by this curtain, but almost under the cover of darkness, like baring their souls. And I can still see that image now. And that I kind of wrote that idea down, almost, again, how easy is it for us to really be ourselves and open ourselves up when you don't actually have someone physically seeing you. And I wrote that idea down on my phone and then kind of rediscovered it years later. And then the story and the characters of Alice and Alfie came through then, so a lot later.
So it all sort of kind of clicked into place.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you should say that, mention the thing about the idea that when you can't see somebody but you're talking to them, a bit like we are now actually on this podcast, because it's audio only. Because I had this conversation, funny enough, yesterday with another guest. I was recording an interview yesterday, and I talked about the reasons that I do it audio only. One is kind of technically based because it's probably a better connection, all that kind of thing. But the other side of it, I do think there is something sometimes, and it's sort of like the power of radio or whatever you want to call it. But when you're having a conversation and you're not looking at the person, I do think sometimes it can lead to kind of more intimate conversations, and maybe you're a bit more willing to open yourself up a little bit more than you will be if you're opposite somebody and you're having to maintain eye contact and all the other things that you do.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think we, even subconsciously, even if you're not really aware of it, having more stimuli, if I'm looking at myself on the camera, am I then actually thinking about, well, what do I look like?
Totally. I get that with Zoom calls.
Easy to get distracted. Yeah. I mean, we're living in that world at the moment.
Totally,
so, it's almost that safety blanket of, it's me, but would they be able to recognize me if I've told them this thing that that's this really big personal thing? I don't know. It's just like a level of safety and security that potentially, we take for granted because we're so used to seeing and interacting with people face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've only recently received the book, so I've only just started reading the book, but it's in close third person, and you're telling the story with kind of a dual narrative, and from what I can gather so far, it's kind of alternating each chapter between your two main characters, and it works really, really well. But was that always the plan when you started writing the book? I'm struggling to speak today. I think it's because I've been for a long walk before I did this podcast, and I think something's dropped out, scrambled in my brain.
This is me every day.
I'm not going to. Yeah, I'm not.
I can't use words.
Yeah, I'm not even going to edit it out. I don't think it's fair. So yeah, what was I saying? So yeah, was that always the plan, or did that kind of style evolve over the writing of the book?
Yeah, and I think with this book, it really was. So the way it came about was very organic in the sense of I kind of started writing it just to write it. So I found that idea on my phone. I was actually away. I'd taken a sabbatical from work and my old job, and I was away actually traveling in India. I was obviously having a very great time when I was looking at my phone at 3 a.m. and I found the idea. Yeah, wild. It was wild. And it all just started to come through, and I didn't really have a sense. The only thing I really planned at that point was the arc of the story, so where I wanted the action to go. And I think because the story centers so much around their dynamic and their difference and ultimately sometimes similarity, it just felt very natural to have both perspectives and speak and get their voices across and have the reader almost be in their heads throughout the action. So it kind of came about very organically, really.
Yeah, well, it works. Yeah, well, it works really, really well. So without giving away too many any spoilers, if there was one thing that you'd like readers to take away from this book, or after finishing it, what would it be? Do you think?
Oof. I think for me, and obviously there is, the commercial love story romance angle, but for me, I think it's at the heart of it has always been the beauty and the power of vulnerability and how important that is for connection. I mean, I know it's a fictional novel, but a lot of what's in there is based on experiences and conversations with a lot of people. And I think for me, the thing I'd like, people to take away is that real sense of how scary, but also wonderful and essential vulnerability is.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great thing to take away. So let's take a bit of a step back then. So look, tell us a little bit about your background and where you grew up and kind of what your earliest memory of writing is.
Okay, yeah. So I'm an Essex girl by birth. Is that a saying? Yeah. So I was born in Essex. Yeah, weird. I was born in Essex and grew up always. Well, I mean, my imagination, I think, if you asked anyone, my family was probably very strong, I'd say. I used to have this thing where I'd watch TV in my head and everyone would be like, what are you doing? And I'd just be making up these stories of like these TV shows I watched, just like daydreaming. Yeah. So I always related, and I think that's probably my earliest memory of creating a story from a very young age. And I would always write. So I always had like notebooks and writing short stories, or I remember my mum, she still talks about it today. I'm like, you need to let that go. But I wrote a poem about a cat and she's like, it was just amazing. I'm like, it really wasn't, but okay. You know, that thing people really hold on to.
Well, it's the first time your child surprises you with something like that. I think it really stays with you as a parent. I've had similar things with my daughter, and like you say, it's probably not that amazing, especially to like other people. But the first time, it's like, wow, like where did that come from? It's like such a nice surprise.
Yeah, like that came out of you.
Yeah, wow, yeah, it's incredible.
You get a sense of what's going on in their heads. Yeah, so I think I was always writing, and storytelling. It probably has always been part of how I think and communicate. Mm-hmm. And then kind of I never really finished anything. I'd always start these stories or have these big ideas, but it never really, it was just kind of a bit of fun on the side. And then I ended up actually kind of going down a very scientific route. So I went to Bristol University. I did biology, very varied career point to get to here. And then I actually went into the corporate world. So I went and did a grad scheme at Tesco.com. Yeah. And then was there for 3 years working in the online kind of space. Then actually moved to Barclays doing something similar for 5 years. And then it was when I went away actually and took that time off. I was away for 5 months, is where the book was written, really. Yeah. And after that, it was a very serendipitous kind of sequence of events, and then actually left my job last February to kind of write, to really focus on writing. So yeah, I've always wanted to write a book, and it's always been on my list at some point, but I never expected it to happen in the way that it's happened, which is kind of beautiful, but also sometimes I kind of need to be like, oh yeah, this is really happening,
So that desire to write must have been, the fact that when you got the chance to get a sabbatical or whatever, and you had that period of time, because there were lots of things you could have done in that 5 months, that weren't writing a book. So what do you think it was? Was that always the plan, do you think, in the back of your mind? On that run up to that 5 months or whatever, were you thinking the whole time, well, this is what I'm going to do with the 5 months, or was it, just something that just kind of just popped into your head and you thought, right, then now's the time?
Yeah, I think looking back, there were probably seeds that were planted. I remember a few people kind of said it to me, like, why don't you spend the time and actually write a book or write something? And I was like, yeah, maybe. Yeah. But I'd planned this whole trip around India and Sri Lanka and I was going and doing all the things, and then like I said, it kind of rediscovering that idea, kind of a month and a half into my trip, and then I think it was that thing of, what else am I going to do? Like, why not just start writing it?
Yeah.
And because I had the freedom and the space, obviously very fortunate that I wasn't in my kind of 9 to 5 plus job.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
There was probably more room for it to come through. And so it was more of it just felt very natural and a really great opportunity to, while I was away, I've had this idea, all these things are coming through. Yeah, I'll just start writing it.
Do you remember?
So I think the seeds were there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So do you remember? Do you sort of remember the first time that you sat down and you started writing it, and like when you got to the end of that, whether it was like 20 minutes later or an hour later or whatever it was? Do you remember that the first time you sat down and how you felt when you got started?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I remember I can see it now. It was the first thing I started writing was when I refound that idea. So I was basically clearing out the notes on my phone. I told you it was a very wild trip for me. Just doing some admin, couldn't sleep, and I saw this note. Yeah, it was just, can't take me out of the office. And I found it, and I just couldn't sleep because all these chapters and these characters were coming through. And I remember writing, and I've still got the book in the notes section of my phone, writing then at like 3 a.m. in Goa, just writing like the first chapter, what is the first chapter of the book. And then the next day I went to a cafe and I had my little notebook and I just planned, what I wanted the characters to be. I wrote kind of who they were and their backstory. And then I planned, chapter by chapter. Obviously, it changed significantly, but, where I'd want it to go. And it kind of was, a few hours later, I was like, oh, maybe I can do this if I just take it like bit by bit. And obviously then there was no pressure or expectation. It was just something that I was doing for myself. So, yeah.
And
it feels really strange when I say it. It feels kind of like a story in itself. That sounds very...
Yeah, well, no, I think it is, though. I think that's the same for every writer with a book and how it came about and everything else. It's kind of why this podcast exists. But so do you remember when it stopped being something just for yourself? Do you remember the first time that you showed it to somebody, or they read something, or that you shared it with somebody?
Yeah, well, there was a man I met in Goa, actually. He started talking to me. I think he saw me writing. His name was Jason, and he was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" Just started having a conversation about writing, and he turns out that he had an incredible life, and he was such an interesting person. But he was the first person I really vocalized, or actually strangely really kind of pushed me to maybe do something with it. And I remember us like reading each other poetry. It's like, it was a really strange, you're like, did we really do that? He was sharing his writing, I was sharing mine. And then he was just like, why not? Like, why would you not do that? And it's really strange how someone that you've only just met, that doesn't really know anything about you, probably again similar to kind of how much we reveal of ourselves when people don't know us or don't see us, actually was it easier for me to share that with someone that I might never see again or have no concept of my life and who I was. But him saying that, I was just like, yeah, why not? So then it was kind of in the back of my mind, and then I actually reached out to a girl that I went to school with, a lady now that I went to school with, on Facebook. And I knew she worked in books. This is also revealing how naive I was to the whole publishing world of anything. And I was like, hey, I know we haven't spoken in 10 years. How are you, Sarah? I think you work with books. I'd seen she posted a lot about it on social media. And I guess I just reached out to ask for her advice on, what if I wanted to do something with this, what would it be? I mean, at that point, it was maybe 20,000 words. And, we laugh about it now, but she replied kind of like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'm actually not I'm not a publisher. I'm a literary agent. Send me a summary of what your book's about and I'll see what I can do. Obviously, probably receiving like so many people out the woodwork, like, oh, hi, I've
probably
written this
thinking,
book.
all right, now I'm going to have to find a way to let this person down gently.
Well, thank God we weren't best friends. So I sent her this summary, and also at that point, like you know, when it's only really been you to read it, you know, I had no idea of whether it was any good. You know, I enjoyed it and I loved the characters, but
Sure.
yeah, so I sent her that, and she was the first person to really read that, and then she asked for what I'd written so far, and then that, yeah, she was kind of the first person to read it in that sense,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it kind of went from there. But it is a very vulnerable thing, I found, sharing that, because when it's yourself, when you're the only one that sees it, it's kind of that like safety net. And then when you put it out there, then you're like, oh, now this is becoming real almost, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And did you find that when you sent it to her, before you sent it to her, did you find yourself rereading the thing before you sent it to her and sort of second guessing yourself and thinking, actually, this is not very good, or I could probably change that, or maybe I shouldn't do that? Did you go through that whole thing, or did you literally just send the file without doing that?
I no, yeah. I mean, there's always second guessing in my head. Everything. I'm like, oh, should we be doing that? Yeah, I had to take it from the notes on my phone and then like place it into. I actually borrowed the girl I was traveling with
editing
laptop.
or my redrafting almost.
Yeah, just and I didn't necessarily. There was probably some tweaking, but again, it was more that. Is there any point in really sending this? That was more the am I just wasting her time, you know, more than like me tweaking it or changing anything. Because I think at that point as well, I didn't really have a sense of what needed to be changed.
Sure,
you know, it was just this raw kind of, not brain dump, but kind of creation. So yeah. And actually, before she saw it, I did send a few chapters to my best friend, who was just very interested when I told her about what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So they were reading it kind of at the same time, which was again quite interesting, because also when it's someone that you're close to, you're almost like, well, you're going to say it's not rubbish because you're my friend.
Yeah.
So I was a bit like, you can read it, but you know, I'm not really going to take your
yeah, sure, yeah.
Thanks.
It's kind of a lose-lose, because it's like if they tell you it's good, you're like, well, they're just my friend is going to say something. If they critique it, you're like, well, what do you know? It's nothing, you know. You don't work in writing.
Yeah, you know as much as me. We don't know anything. Let's get someone else's opinion.
So it's kind of a lose-lose. It's just like a little booster, isn't it? Almost.
Yeah, just like it's almost that like, is this really terrible? Just tell me that, and then
the ravings of a mad person.
yeah.
So do you remember how long it took before the agent got back to you with anything? Was it days? Was it weeks?
It was probably days, maybe, because as well, it wasn't the full book. It was only 20,000 words, so there wasn't. I mean, she wasn't reading the whole manuscript, but yeah, she got back in a few days, maybe a week or so.
And do you remember the time? Do you remember those few days in terms of how you felt while it was away, or did you just send it and forget it?
Yeah, again, because I had no expectation. I mean, it's probably such a wonderful time of my life that is so rare. Like normally, you know, there's always expectations or pressures, or, you know, you've got a plan and you're trying to work towards it. Whereas this was probably the only time in my life where I've never really, I mean, I was nervous because she did know me and she had some sense of who I was. So, you know, if it was really awful, then I'd feel a bit like, oh, that was embarrassing.
Yeah.
And like, or she might tell people that I used to go to school with, you know, that whole.
You'll never believe what she sent me. Yeah.
Do you remember Emily? Gosh,
she's gone nuts.
Yeah. God, do you want to read this? It's awful. No, she wouldn't do that.
Post it on Facebook.
Yeah, the old school alumni website.
Pretended that the old pretend you're a literary agent trick.
Yeah. Just to see
there's
people's.
A book there. Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. Just premise for a story. That.
Well, actually, that could be a story in itself. So yeah, no, I was nervous, and again, I felt quite like vulnerable in the fact that someone was actually reading it through an eye of like, is this any good, rather than like, oh thanks, this is something to just that my friend's done. But I remember being in Sri Lanka, and I remember getting the email, and I remember the girl I was traveling with, I just looked at her and I was like, Hannah, she wants to sign me. And she was like, yeah, whatever. And I was like, I was just like, no, I'm being serious. And she just like started screaming. It was like, what? And we were just there, both stood there looking at this email like, no. It was the most surreal situation. So yeah, I remember that quite. And then I just didn't really know what to do with myself. I was like, okay, what does that even mean? Like, I don't.
So you thought this is an absolute, this whole writing a book and getting it, getting an agent thing's an absolute cinch.
Oh, well, I mean.
You must have thought that, though.
I know it's not. I think again, because I just had no concept of what the process was even from that. Like, I didn't really even know you needed an agent. Honestly, the hand holding that Sarah has had to do, who's my agent, is unreal. She's like, okay, this is happening. This is, yeah, but I also knew a lot of it does depend on timing. So if for me, I was very fortunate that she was looking for that particular genre of book at the time. Whereas who knows, if I'd have reached out a year later, then maybe it wouldn't have been of the moment. So a part of me does think that that's when I say kind of it's very serendipitous in its kind of timing and sequence of events. So,
but yeah, I think probably the most, yeah, I mean, there will, joking aside, I'm sure there will be people that'll be gnashing their teeth listening to this saying, oh God, I hate her.
Sorry.
But no, but joking aside, I think the most important thing is that you actually got it out there, because I do think, and I count myself in this to a certain extent with things that I've done and am doing or whatever. Sometimes knowing too much is it's a problem. It causes loads of self-doubt, and you second guess everything, and you don't, and it just puts you, it just makes you freeze. You just go completely, there's just inaction. You don't do anything. And the point is, because you didn't have any of that stuff, and you're writing something that you were just passionate about, and you were finding it fun. And you thought, well, because you have that kind of naivety about it, it's actually stood you in good stead. And yes, there's always an element of, well, you sent it to that person at the right time and blah, blah, blah. But if you hadn't have sent it at all, then, it definitely wouldn't be out there. That's the fact of it.
Yeah. And I think I struggle. It's funny because obviously if you'd only heard this, hearing this story of how, I just put it out there, I didn't, I was, I mean, that is not me in any way, shape or form. That's when I think back and I'm like, God, that was so strange that I did that, because normally I'm very, and I think that's part of why I never really actually wrote anything to its completion before, because I'd get to a point and I would just give up because it wasn't good enough, or I wouldn't see the point in it, or, it wouldn't be coming easily. So then I'd stop, because I have this, I just am very much a perfectionist, and if I am not good at something or I overthink something, then I kind of like shy away from it. And also it's a very vulnerable thing, and putting yourself out there. Like, I've still got a lot of stuff that, poetries or collections of writing I've written, and I'm still afraid to put it out there. But then I just keep having to like come back to that thing of, you can't go anywhere if you don't start somewhere. Like, that is the thing I have to keep telling myself, because if you can always change it. And that is one of the biggest lessons I've probably learned from the whole thing is, no, you're not going to get anywhere if no one can read it, if there's nothing to see, So, it was definitely something that has taught me a lot that I want to kind of use in other areas of my life, because I think we are very cautious, especially with something so personal, because writing can be very, it's a reflection of you sometimes,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you actually sit down to write, and you mentioned at the top of the show, you'd be writing, when you mentioned at the top of the show, you're writing the second book, but how do you actually get into the zone mentally? Is it, do you like, have you got set hours that you do it? Do you have a set time? Do you book a time out in your diary? Or is it just a case of, oh, feel like writing something and I'll sit down and do it? Talk me through that.
Yeah. So what I tend to do, well, recently I've tried to get into a bit of a routine in kind of going on the, if you don't start somewhere, you're never going to get anywhere. And I think, I'll sit down. I mean, it's very different. It depends on what stage I'm at the moment, because I now know the plot and the characters and where I'm going. I do have to have an element of not forcing myself, but holding myself accountable to sit and write something. And I kind of have to, what I've learned is being very relaxed and quite grounded, because I think spending so much time in my head, obviously as a writer, you're kind of creating all that stuff, it's kind of exhausting. So I make sure I get up and I do some kind of yoga or go for a walk or something before I start. And taking breaks as well is, being quite disciplined with, not just sitting endlessly at the computer, which I think, especially in the time we're living in, is very easy to forget about. If I was in an office, maybe I would go out for a walk with someone, or I would have a coffee break. We don't really tend to do that for ourselves, or I don't, especially when I work at home. So, but yeah, what is most frustrating is normally I'll have an okay day of writing. I'll get into bed, and about midnight, all these ideas and these stuff will come through, and I'm like, oh, for goodness sake. So then I'll just write it down on my phone, go to sleep, and then the next morning kind of pick it up and edit it. So I think it's definitely something about when my brain is relaxed. That is kind of when the best stuff comes through, but it's obviously not very conducive to my sleeping.
I find that, but I kind of get it I do get it where I've had trouble sleeping, but it's usually, to be honest, I wake up very, very early. I might go to the loo or something, and then that's when an idea pops into my brain, when I'm literally half asleep, and then I'll try to go back to sleep, and I can't. And I have to get up and, as you say, put it in my phone or do something with it, because otherwise, forget about it. So what you mentioned there, like when you've had a good day or whatever, what is a good day writing? Do you think about how many words? Do you think, well, that just felt good and I enjoyed writing that chapter or that scene? What's a good day of writing for you?
Yeah, and I definitely think it's changed. And because I've read a lot about, obviously different authors' styles and how they approach writing. I think for me, yesterday I wrote 2 chapters and then deleted all of it because it wasn't right. And normally I'd be like, that was an awful day. But I think even just progressing the story sometimes feels like a good day, especially when you're at tricky points, or you're at points where it's felt quite hard to get anything out. So sometimes I think just a good day is, obviously a great day is when it just flows and you've kind of, the story's progressing and the writing feels exciting and alive and it's progressed and I've written a lot. But I'm also trying to think of a good day as, even if it's just writing something and knowing that's not the right thing to write and deleting it. Because I do think... Yeah, sorry.
No, go on. You do think...
I do think, personally, I can become very hard on myself if I've said, 1,000 words a day and I don't eat that. Then that becomes quite disempowering to me personally, because it is such a kind of flowing up and down kind of process. Yeah,
so it's more about, for you, it's more about the experience of doing it, really. That's what decides whether it's good or bad, and the fact that you kind of, as you say, progressing the story. So with the for example, if we take, you said you ended up deleting 2 chapters or whatever yesterday. What was it that made you delete it? Was it not so much the writing, but where the story was going, or what you'd said, or the fact that you deleted it as well? Because that's quite a big thing to actually delete it. Like, I've done that where even as I'm writing it, sometimes I think, oh, this is just wrong. This is taking the story in the wrong place. But even then, I've not got the actual, courage to delete it. I'll put it aside, or I'll put it I'll drag it into, if I'm using Scrivener or something, I'll drag it in a folder or whatever. But you will actually delete it?
It depends. I mean, I do have like a folder probably similar, which is like deleted extracts. Yeah. I mean, they don't make any sense, but I'm like, oh, this was a random paragraph.
I do that, yeah.
It's so funny reading back because you're like, what? Or like, oh, it's like very interesting where the story was going to go. Yesterday was mainly, for me, it's very much the character and how I was writing one of the characters called Finn. I don't think that's giving too much away of anything of the second
Right,
book.
make a note of that. Yeah.
Well, there's the exclusive.
That's the headline. New characters called Finn.
Subject to change in the editing process, obviously.
Yeah.
He might just disappear. Neville is now Neville.
That's right,
yeah. The way, because again, this one is at the moment dual narrative, and his mood and how he was speaking, and it was just when I was writing it, I almost had to write it and get it out so I could get into his head almost.
Sure.
But it didn't really progress the story, and it wasn't quite how I wanted him to feel on the page in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And because it was going to be so vastly different in terms of his thoughts and his mood, that's why I kind of deleted it, because it was almost like a flashing out. Like I kind of sometimes have to write something just to get in their mindset. And it's nothing to do with really the story. And then, come back.
I totally get that. I mean, it's one of the things, I suggest to other people sometimes, and I've done it myself, where if you're struggling to get the voice of a character, or it might even be, you're struggling with when they speak, you're struggling with the dialogue, they're not consistent or whatever it is. And just to write a page of, go into first person as that person and just start talking, almost like a diary entry almost. And I've done that before, and I've written, like a few pages like that, and then I'm like, right, okay, now I know who this person is. I get it, and I found out things that I probably should have known in the first place, but I didn't realize that I knew, or I hadn't thought about. That's the other thing. It's like, and I've seen things where you can do questionnaires and things. Where did the character's parents meet, or what was their first job, or when did they have their first kids, whatever it is, and things like that. You're never going to use it in the book, but it does flesh it out for you.
For sure. And I definitely think in Before I Saw You, there was, in the first draft, there's probably so much more about, those small nuances or those character intricacies that were on the page, which were removed because they didn't add anything to the story. But it was important for me to know, because when I'm in their heads, I need to live and breathe who they are, and all of that stuff makes up.
Yeah, and it kind of comes out, and I should imagine it comes out in what they do as much as anything else, and what they say, even if it's not the specific thing, the way that they say something or the way they react to something, it comes out of your knowledge of that, and how they're going to do it. So, what would you say, as we kind of move towards the wrapping things up, what would you say has been the most helpful piece of creative or inspirational advice that you've been given along the way?
Oh,
it can be very off the top of your head. What kind of the first thing that comes to mind, and it might not even be anything to do with writing necessarily.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. I mean, the first thing that came up was that idea of you've got to start somewhere. And I don't know who. I mean, it's not exactly very profound, and I think it applies to a lot of things. But it is that you won't. There's no point in keeping everything in your head, or being, I think I guess I spent a lot of my time when I was younger being like, oh, but I'm going to do this, or I want to do this, and that was all well and good. But someone was like, well, if you don't start, you're never going to do it. That is a guarantee. Like you said, like you don't send it, no one's ever going to read it.
Right.
So I definitely think that has been a big thing for me. It's just like, it doesn't matter if it's perfect. It's, it doesn't matter if you delete it, or like, just get something out of you onto the page or out into the world. And then, take it from there. So I think that's been a big thing. And then the only other thing I'd say is, especially probably quite present at the moment, when other people are reading your book and commenting on it, which is always an interesting one.
Yeah.
Feedback is a gift, but I think for me, not always
one that you want, though, is it?
No. Can I return this? Thank you, your comments.
I don't even want to unwrap it.
Yeah, you just pass it on to someone else. Perfectly gift wrapped. But it's that idea of, and it was actually an old manager of mine told me, it's like, be gracious and accept all the feedback that people give, but it's within your power to choose on what you act on. So, you don't have to take on board everyone's opinion, and not everyone will like you or what you write, or, whatever it is, but it's your choice on who you listen to and who you, follow their advice or make changes off the back of their comments, which for me I still have to remember, because I'm very good at just listening to the negative things and not really, drowning in all that, in that feedback, rather than being quite selective and focusing on, the areas I want to
I think
work
it's
on.
if it's something that you're a little bit self-conscious about already as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that with things.
Yes.
If it's something that you're already a little bit unsure about, or you thought, I don't know whether that's great, and then someone says something even remotely related to it, you're like, I knew that. I knew that was rubbish.
Yeah.
I knew that I was struggling with that, and that's and you just immediately accept it, and it's not always the case.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, again, I have to then find examples in my life where, me and my friend have read or watched the same film, read the same book, and we've enjoyed it differently, but it doesn't mean it's bad. I have to just always remind myself that everyone is different. And so everyone will have a different opinion on one thing, and that's okay,
Absolutely. And in regards to your book, that's why I kind of asked you that question at the beginning, if there was one thing that you hoped somebody would take away from reading your book, but at the end of the day, they're going to take that and maybe, 50 or 100 other different things that you can't even predict. You don't know, because you don't know who it lands with and what they've experienced. And there might even be people reading your book that have had really, really similar experiences to the ones that you're describing, good or bad. So you just don't know, do you? That's the thing. What you can do is put it out there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's great. So just to finish things off, why don't you give us I know you probably don't want to jinx it or anything, so you're probably not going to give us too many specifics, but can you give us a sense of what's coming up next, and also tell people where they can find out more about you online?
Yeah, of course. So what's next? So writing book number 2, which is exciting.
After I saw you.
After I saw you with Neville. That's great, actually. I just keep milking this cow for as long as I can. Title subject to change. Book 2, I would then like to write a 3rd. I've also got a collection of poetry that I'm thinking about putting out myself, so not so kind of self-publishing or finding a way to get that out there. I'm also I'm putting this out there to hold myself accountable. There we go. I'm going to try and write a script.
Oh, great.
Really, just why not? I've never done it before, and it's just really interesting. So to me, so I'm going to
script
just
or
do
TV
that.
or what? Have you got anything in mind?
Yeah, at the moment it's a TV series.
Great.
Yeah, but that probably changed when I start writing it. I'm like, oh, man, this is actually a blockbuster film.
You just don't know. See where it goes.
So that's my writing plans. And then to find me, I've got you can find me on Instagram I'm not very big on Twitter, although I know where all the writing people go. But it's eJane Houghton on Instagram. And I've got a website, which is emilyjanehoughton.com. So yeah, they're probably the two main places where you can find out about me.
Brilliant.
Right.
Well, I'll put all those in the show notes. For the time being, great to chat to you, Emily, and thanks for coming on Joined Up Writing.
Thank you so much, Wayne.
Joined Up Writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Emily Houghton, whose book Before I Saw You is available right now, and I'll put all of her links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That's it for this week, other than me reminding you to make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. That way you can have it downloaded automatically every time. Also, it just really helps us to get more subscriptions, so I know you probably listen to it regularly anyway, but just press the subscribe button. It would really help out. Also, remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts, as it really does help others to find the show, or just recommend it to one of your friends. That would be great. Other than that, that's it for this week, but thanks again for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.